There is a particular kind of power that the world does not teach you about. It is not the power of wealth, status, or physical strength. It is not the power that comes from controlling others or dominating your environment. It is something far more potent and infinitely more rare. The power that emerges when you achieve complete mastery over your own emotional state. When you can stand in the middle of chaos and remain calm, when you can face provocation without reacting, when you can experience loss without being destroyed, you become dangerous in a way that cannot be competed with or taken from you. The ancient Stoics understood this power, cultivated it deliberately, and used it to navigate some of the most turbulent periods in human history. What they discovered was radical. True power is not external conquest but internal sovereignty. Most people are slaves to their emotions without realizing it. They wake up and their mood is determined by the weather, by the tone of an email, by a stranger's comment on social media. They move through their days at the mercy of their feelings, reacting to everything, controlled by forces they cannot see and do not understand. Someone cuts them off in traffic and they rage for an hour. A colleague makes a subtle criticism and they spiral into self-doubt. A romantic interest does not text back and they become anxious, desperate, diminished. They are like puppets, and their emotions are the strings, and everyone and everything around them is pulling those strings constantly. This is not living. This is being lived by your reactions. The Stoic philosophers looked at this universal human condition and asked a revolutionary question. What if you could cut the strings? What if you could train yourself to experience emotions without being controlled by them? What if you could feel anger without acting on it, fear without being paralyzed by it, desire without being enslaved to it? They discovered that this was not only possible but that it was the very foundation of human freedom. Marcus Aurelius, who had absolute power over the Roman Empire, wrote that the person who controls their own mind has more power than the person who conquers cities. Epictetus, who had no external power at all, taught that the free person is the one whose emotions cannot be disturbed by circumstances beyond their control. This emotional mastery makes you dangerous because it makes you unpredictable to those who try to manipulate you. Most people can be controlled through their emotions. Make them angry and they become stupid, easy to outmaneuver. Make them afraid and they become compliant, willing to sacrifice anything for a sense of security. Make them desire something intensely and they become desperate, willing to compromise their principles. But the person who has mastered their emotions cannot be controlled this way. They cannot be baited into reaction. They cannot be frightened into submission. They cannot be seduced into betraying their values. They operate from a center of calm rationality that remains untouched by the emotional turbulence around them. When you achieve this mastery, you see the world with a clarity that others cannot access. While everyone else is clouded by emotion, making decisions based on how they feel in the moment, you can perceive reality as it actually is. You can see opportunities that others miss because they are too anxious to act. You can avoid disasters that others walk into because they are too angry to think clearly. You can maintain relationships that others destroy because they are too reactive to communicate wisely. This clarity is a profound competitive advantage in every domain of life. In business, in relationships, in personal growth, in any arena where human beings compete and cooperate, the person who can master their emotions while others are mastered by theirs will dominate. But emotional mastery is not about suppression. This is the critical distinction that most people miss. The Stoics were not advocating for becoming emotionless robots, for denying your humanity, for pretending you do not feel. They were advocating for something far more sophisticated: the ability to observe your emotions without being swept away by them. They taught that emotions are natural responses, information from your nervous system about your environment. The problem is not the emotion itself, but your identification with it, your belief that you are your emotions, your compulsion to act on every feeling that arises. Seneca made this distinction beautifully when he described the difference between the first movement of emotion and what comes after. The first movement is involuntary. Someone insults you and you feel a flash of anger. This is natural, biological, unavoidable. But what you do next is entirely within your control. Do you feed the anger, rehearse the insult, plan your revenge, let it grow into rage? Or do you observe it, recognize it as a temporary state, and choose your response based on reason rather than reaction? The untrained person has no gap between stimulus and response. Something happens and they react immediately, mechanically, predictably. The Stoic creates a gap, a space of awareness, where choice becomes possible. This gap is where your power lives. In that moment between feeling and acting, you reclaim your sovereignty. You are no longer a puppet dancing to the rhythm of external events. You become the author of your responses, the director of your life, the master of your fate. And when you can do this consistently, when you have trained yourself to create this gap even in the most intense emotional states, you become formidable. People sense that they are dealing with someone different, someone who cannot be manipulated through the usual emotional levers, someone who operates from a deeper source of power. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. He would remind himself in the morning that he would encounter difficult people, the arrogant, the envious, the dishonest, the manipulative. But he prepared himself not to be disturbed by them. He recognized that they acted from ignorance, that their behavior could not touch his inner citadel unless he allowed it. This was not naive optimism. This was strategic emotional preparation. He was training himself to maintain his center regardless of what the day brought, to respond to provocation with calm reason rather than reactive emotion. The practical application of this philosophy begins with understanding what you can and cannot control. You cannot control external events. You cannot control what other people say, think, or do. You cannot control whether you succeed or fail in your endeavors. You cannot control the past or most of the future. But you have absolute control over one thing: your judgment about what happens. This judgment is the source of all your emotions. You do not become angry because someone insulted you. You become angry because you judge that the insult is terrible, that it diminishes you, that it must be avenged. Change the judgment and the emotion changes. Epictetus taught this relentlessly to his students. He would give them scenarios designed to provoke emotional reactions and then ask them to examine the judgments that created those reactions. A student says he is devastated because his business failed. Epictetus asks, "Is it the failure that devastates you, or your judgment that failure is catastrophic?" Another student says he is miserable because his lover left him. Epictetus asks, "Is it the absence of your lover that creates misery, or your judgment that you cannot be happy without them?" This is not semantic wordplay. This is the key to emotional freedom. When you realize that your emotions arise from your judgments rather than from events themselves, you realize that you have far more power than you thought. But understanding this intellectually is vastly different from being able to implement it in the moment of emotional intensity. This is where practice becomes essential. The Stoics did not just philosophize about emotional mastery. They trained for it like athletes preparing for competition. They practiced voluntary discomfort to build their tolerance for difficulty. They rehearsed loss in their minds so they would be prepared when it came. They deliberately put themselves in situations that would provoke emotion and practiced observing rather than reacting. This training built a kind of psychological muscle that could be called upon when it mattered most. One powerful practice is what modern psychology calls cognitive distancing or diffusion. The Stoics called it viewing from above or the view from the cosmos. When you are caught in an intense emotion, you zoom out. You imagine yourself from a distance, seeing this moment in the context of your entire life, or seeing your entire life in the context of human history, or seeing human history in the context of the vastness of time and space. From this perspective, the thing that seems so important, so worthy of your emotional reactivity, becomes smaller. Not unimportant, but appropriately sized. You realize that this moment of anger or fear or sadness is a tiny blip in an incomprehensibly vast universe, and this realization creates the space you need to choose your response. Marcus Aurelius used this practice constantly in his meditations. He would describe elaborate feasts as just dead plants and animals arranged on a plate. He would describe purple robes as just sheep's wool dyed with shellfish blood. He would describe sexual intercourse as just friction and fluid exchange. This was not cynicism. This was a technique for seeing past his emotional reactions to the underlying reality of things. It prevented him from being swept away by desire, disgust, fear, or any other emotion that might cloud his judgment. He trained himself to see things as they actually are rather than through the distorting lens of emotion. Another practice is the discipline of assent. Every moment, your mind is generating impressions about what is happening around you. Someone speaks to you in a sharp tone, and your mind generates the impression they are being hostile. A project fails, and your mind generates the impression, I am a failure. These impressions arise automatically, but you do not have to assent to them. You can observe the impression, examine it, and decide whether it is accurate. Often, under examination, you realize that the impression is distorted by emotion, by past experience, by fear or desire. The sharp tone might have nothing to do with you. The failed project might be feedback rather than a verdict on your worth. By withholding automatic assent and examining your impressions, you gain control over the judgments that create your emotions. This makes you dangerous because it makes you immune to emotional manipulation. Consider how most people are controlled in relationships, in workplaces, in political discourse. Someone uses anger to intimidate you into backing down. Someone uses guilt to manipulate you into doing what they want. Someone uses fear to make you compliant. Someone uses flattery to make you drop your guard. These tactics work on most people because most people cannot separate the emotion from the reality. They feel afraid and they believe they are in danger. They feel guilty and they believe they have done something wrong. They feel flattered and they believe they are special. But when you have trained yourself in emotional mastery, you can feel the emotion and simultaneously recognize the manipulation. You can feel fear and still act courageously. You can feel guilt and still maintain your boundaries. You can feel the pleasure of flattery and still maintain your skepticism. The person who has achieved this level of mastery becomes extremely difficult to control, and this is threatening to those who are used to controlling others through emotional manipulation. They will call you cold, robotic, unfeeling. They will accuse you of not caring, of being heartless, of lacking empathy. This is projection. They cannot imagine feeling deeply without being controlled by those feelings, so they assume that your refusal to be controlled means you do not feel. But the Stoics felt deeply. Marcus Aurelius grieved the loss of his children. Seneca loved his friends and missed them during exile. Epictetus cared about his students and felt frustration when they did not learn. They simply refused to let their feelings dictate their actions or cloud their judgment. There is profound strength in this position. When you can feel without being controlled by your feelings, you can engage with life more fully rather than less. You can love without the desperate neediness that destroys relationships. You can pursue goals without the anxiety that sabotages performance. You can face loss without the despair that prevents healing. You can experience anger without the rage that damages what you value. You become like water. You can be soft and yielding when that serves you, or powerful and forceful when that is required, but you are never rigid, never brittle, never at the mercy of a single emotional state. The Stoics identified specific emotions that are particularly enslaving and developed specific techniques for each. Let us examine 3: anger, fear, and desire. These are the primary ways that most people lose their power and surrender their agency to external circumstances. Anger is perhaps the most immediately destructive emotion. Seneca wrote an entire treatise on anger, calling it temporary madness. When you are angry, you become stupid. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational decision-making, effectively goes offline. You say things you regret, you damage relationships you value, you make decisions that serve your momentary emotional satisfaction rather than your long-term interests. And worst of all, anger gives other people power over you. If someone can make you angry, they can control you. They can bait you into overreacting, into revealing information you should keep private, into making mistakes they can exploit. The person who masters anger becomes invulnerable to this form of manipulation. The Stoic technique for anger is to pause before acting. Seneca recommended that when you feel anger rising, you do nothing. Do not speak, do not act, do not even move if possible. Just breathe and wait. Anger is like a wave. It rises, it peaks, and it falls. If you can avoid acting during the rise and peak, by the time it falls, you will see the situation more clearly. You will realize that the thing that seems so intolerable is actually minor. You will recognize that responding with anger would only make things worse. You will find a more effective response that comes from reason rather than rage. This pause, this gap between stimulus and response, is where your power to choose lives. But the deeper work with anger is examining the judgments that create it. You become angry when you judge that something should not have happened, that someone should not have acted the way they did, that the world should conform to your preferences. The Stoic asks, who told you the world should obey your preferences? On what authority do you declare that things should be other than they are? This is not passive acceptance of injustice. This is recognizing the difference between what you can change and what you cannot. You can work to change unjust systems. You can set boundaries with people who mistreat you. But you cannot be angry at reality for being reality. That anger is wasted energy that could be directed toward effective action. Fear is another major source of lost power. When you are afraid, you become conservative, risk-averse, unable to seize opportunities. You make decisions designed to avoid pain rather than pursue growth. You stay in situations that diminish you because the unknown seems worse. You allow yourself to be controlled by threats, real or imagined. Most fear is not about present danger but about imagined future catastrophe. You are not actually in danger right now. You are afraid of what might happen, and this fear of future events robs you of agency in the present moment. The Stoic technique for fear is premeditation of adversity. Instead of trying to avoid thinking about what you fear, you deliberately imagine it in detail. What is the worst that could happen? Really, genuinely, what is the actual worst-case scenario? And if that happened, how would you handle it? Usually, when you examine your fears directly, you realize that even the worst case is survivable. You realize that you are stronger than you thought, that you have more resources than you recognized, that the catastrophe you fear is unlikely, and even if it occurred, you would find a way through it. This reduces fear from a paralyzing force to useful information that helps you prepare. Seneca practiced this by periodically living as if he had lost everything. He would eat the cheapest food, wear rough clothing, sleep on hard surfaces, and ask himself, is this what I feared? Is this the poverty that I have been afraid of? and he would discover that it was not nearly as terrible as his imagination had made it. This practice freed him from the fear that kept most wealthy Romans in a state of constant anxiety about losing their status. He knew from direct experience that he could survive and even find contentment in circumstances that others considered unbearable. This knowledge made him fearless in a way that translated to tremendous power. He could take risks that others could not. He could speak truths that others were too afraid to voice. He could act with courage because he had already faced his fears and found them manageable. Desire is the subtlest form of emotional slavery because it disguises itself as positive. You want something, you pursue it, and this seems natural and good. But uncontrolled desire makes you a slave to whatever you desire. The person you desire has power over you. The job you desire has power over you. The status you desire has power over you. You become willing to compromise your principles, to betray your values, to diminish yourself in pursuit of what you want. And even if you get it, desire does not end. It simply shifts to the next thing, keeping you in a perpetual state of lack, always reaching for something just beyond your grasp. The Stoic technique for desire is to distinguish between natural necessary desires and vain desires. You need food, water, shelter, basic safety. These are natural and necessary. You do not need luxury food, a mansion, high status, or constant entertainment. These are vain desires, created by culture rather than nature. When you can separate the necessary from the vain, you can satisfy the necessary easily and release the vain without feeling deprived. You realize that you already have everything you need to be content, and everything beyond that is optional. This realization is liberating. You stop being controlled by advertising, by social comparison, by the constant message that you need more to be happy. But the deeper practice with desire is what the Stoics called negative visualization or imagining loss. Each day, you imagine that the things and people you value could be taken from you. Not to make yourself miserable, but to recognize that everything is temporary, that nothing belongs to you permanently. When you hold things lightly, knowing they are borrowed rather than owned, you appreciate them more deeply and you suffer less when they inevitably change or depart. You desire them less desperately because you are already prepared for their loss. This does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop being enslaved by your caring. When you master these three emotions, anger, fear, and desire, you become dangerous in the most potent sense. You cannot be manipulated through provocation because you do not react to anger. You cannot be controlled through threats because you have already prepared for your worst fears. You cannot be seduced through temptation because you have separated necessary desires from vain ones. You operate from a place of such deep internal security that external circumstances lose their power to disturb you. This is the Stoic ideal of the sage. Someone so anchored in reason and virtue that the storms of fortune cannot shake them. But emotional mastery is not just defensive. It is also the foundation for positive action in the world. When you are not constantly reacting to emotions, when you have created that gap between stimulus and response, you can act with intention rather than impulse. You can pursue meaningful goals without being derailed by setbacks. You can maintain difficult relationships without being destroyed by conflict. You can take calculated risks without being paralyzed by fear. You can lead others effectively because you remain calm when everyone else is panicking. You can make difficult decisions because your judgment is not clouded by emotion. Consider how this plays out in practical situations. In a business negotiation, the person who can master their emotions has an enormous advantage. While the other party is driven by fear of loss or desire for gain, you can see the situation objectively. You can walk away if the terms are not favorable because you are not desperate. You can hold your position without becoming angry when challenged. You can read the other person's emotional state and use that information strategically without being manipulated by your own emotions. This calm rationality often results in far better outcomes than emotional reactivity ever could. In relationships, emotional mastery transforms everything. Instead of reacting defensively to criticism, you can listen and consider whether it contains truth. Instead of withdrawing in fear when conflict arises, you can stay present and work through it. Instead of clinging desperately to someone out of need, you can love them freely from a place of sufficiency. Instead of saying hurtful things in anger, you can pause and communicate your needs clearly. The person who has mastered their emotions creates relationships characterized by depth, authenticity, and mutual respect rather than drama, manipulation, and codependency. In leadership, emotional mastery is perhaps most critical. People look to leaders during times of crisis, and what they need is calm certainty rather than panicked reaction. The leader who can remain composed when everyone else is losing their composure provides an anchor point. They demonstrate through their very presence that the situation can be handled, that reaction is optional, that there is always a gap between what happens and how we respond. This kind of leadership inspires genuine respect rather than fearful compliance. People follow not because they are afraid of the consequences if they do not, but because they trust the judgment of someone who can think clearly when emotions are running high. But the ultimate reason to pursue emotional mastery is not strategic advantage over others. It is freedom for yourself. Every emotion that controls you is a chain limiting your range of possible responses. Every time you react automatically to a stimulus, you are being controlled by that stimulus. Every time you allow your mood to be determined by circumstances, you are surrendering your agency. The Stoics pursued emotional mastery not to gain power over others, but to reclaim power over themselves. They wanted to be free, and they understood that freedom begins with mastery of your own mind. The practice is lifelong. You do not master your emotions once and remain forever in that state. Every day brings new challenges, new provocations, new opportunities to react or respond. Every day you must practice the pause, examine your judgments, choose your response rather than being controlled by your reactions. Some days you will do this well. Other days you will fail, reacting before you can catch yourself. The Stoic response to failure is not harsh self-judgment but gentle redirection. You notice what happened, you understand why it happened, you learn from it, and you practice doing better next time. Marcus Aurelius wrote reminders to himself about this constantly. He would tell himself in the morning not to expect the day to go smoothly, to prepare for difficulty, to remember that he had the resources to handle whatever came. He would reflect in the evening on moments when he reacted poorly and consider how he might have responded better. This was not self-flagellation. This was the training regimen of someone committed to mastery. He treated his mind the way an athlete treats their body, with discipline, with regular practice, with patience for the slow process of building strength. As you develop this mastery, you will notice changes in how others perceive you. Some will be drawn to your calm in a chaotic world. They will sense that you are different, that you operate from some source of strength they do not have access to, and they will want to understand it. Others will be threatened by your refusal to be controlled through emotional manipulation. They will try harder to provoke you, to make you react, to prove that you are just like everyone else. Your steadiness in the face of their provocations will either inspire them to examine their own emotional slavery or drive them away. Either outcome is acceptable to the Stoic. You will also notice changes in yourself. Situations that once would have ruined your day will begin to feel manageable. People who once could control you through anger or guilt or fear will find that their tactics no longer work. You will find yourself able to do difficult things that you once avoided because the emotional discomfort seemed unbearable. You will discover resources within yourself that you did not know existed because you never had to access them when you were enslaved to emotion. You will become dangerous not in the sense of being harmful, but in the sense of being formidable, capable, impossible to control through the usual means. The Stoic power revealed through emotional mastery is this: when you cannot be moved by circumstances, you can move circumstances. When you cannot be disturbed by opposition, you can overcome opposition. When you cannot be controlled by external forces, you become a force unto yourself. This is not about dominating others or accumulating power over people. This is about achieving such complete sovereignty over your own internal state that you can act in the world with clarity, wisdom, and effectiveness regardless of what the world throws at you. The world needs this kind of power now more than ever. We live in an age designed to keep you emotionally reactive, constantly triggered, perpetually outraged or afraid or craving. The algorithms that shape your digital environment have learned how to manipulate your emotions for profit. The media you consume is crafted to provoke reaction. The political discourse is engineered to divide and inflame. Most people are being played like instruments, and they do not even realize it. But you can choose differently. You can practice the ancient art of emotional mastery. You can create the gap between stimulus and response. You can train yourself to observe your emotions without being controlled by them. This is the path to becoming dangerous in the way that matters. Not dangerous to others, but dangerous to the forces that seek to control you. Dangerous to manipulation, to propaganda, to the subtle and not so subtle ways that people and systems try to override your agency. When you master your emotions, you reclaim your power to choose. You become the author of your responses, the director of your attention, the guardian of your peace. You become free in the only way that freedom is actually possible, free within yourself, regardless of external circumstances. The Stoics proved this was possible 2,000 years ago in circumstances far more difficult than most of us will ever face. Marcus Aurelius achieved it while ruling an empire at war. Epictetus achieved it while enslaved. Seneca achieved it while navigating deadly political intrigue. If they could master their emotions in those circumstances, what excuse do we have in ours? The techniques are available. The philosophy is clear. The only question is whether you have the courage to practice, the patience to train, the commitment to mastery that makes you truly dangerous. If you are ready to reclaim your power, to stop being controlled by your emotions, to become formidable through mastery rather than force, subscribe and continue this journey. The path is clear but not easy. The Stoics offer no shortcuts, no quick fixes, no promises of effortless transformation. They offer something better, a proven method for achieving genuine freedom through disciplined practice. You become dangerous when you master your emotions. The question is, are you willing to do the work?